coming early this morning. I hope everyone's been having a fun conference. On a personal note, it's just been really moving for me to just see everyone back. It feels like we're back again after all of these years. It's just been bringing a smile to my face when I just see everybody connecting and together and engaged, and that's what this whole conference is about. So thank you all for attending and making this conference, what it is. I also want to thank our illustrious panelists, the Composer Advisory Committee, Michael Levine, Tim Edwards, Angela Sheik, Dan Graham, Michelle Weiss-Maslin. And you can look up their, I'm not going to tell, their bios are on the app, so if you want to know more about, everything they've done, you can go look at the app. You can go to imdb.com too and find out there. And our special guests, Ryan Rapsis of Total Metadata, and Edwina Travis Chin, VP Music Content and Strategy at APM. Just so we know a little bit more about you, it would be really helpful to do a quick little poll and find out composers. Who's a composer in this room? Great, that's what we were hoping. What about catalog owners and publishers? Fantastic, wonderful. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. I want to ask, let you know about the structure of what we're talking about. There's going to be 3 parts to this, and there's going to be a Q&A for each part. So it's not like we're going to save it to the end, because we identified 3 important parts for having a successful production music track. Creation of the track, metadata best practices, and then we'll go on to finding work, finding catalogs, working with catalogs, how to find a catalog, best practices with that, and then finally, revenue streams. Who collects them, and every step of the process is extremely important to get right in order to ensure the best possibility and chances that your music can be successful for you. So I think the first thing we're just going to do is going to do a little, I call it a pop quiz, but let's just, I want to play some music, just a little bit of each one, and ask if we think this is a production music track. You can make it louder, that'd be great. It's early, let's wake up. Thank you. Production music track? Yeah.
Hey, lose the smoke and mirrors, wanna see the real you clear. Are you with me? I can hear you, gotta shout, gotta dance, gotta be pop-tastic.
Production music track? Yes. Production music track? No. Okay, we got some no's. Okay. Production music track? Yeah. Production music track? Yes. How about this one? Production music track? We're saying no? I don't know. Well, what about this? I remember when I lost my mind. Was that a production music track? No. But this absolutely is a universal production music track that was the basis of Gnarls Barkley's Crazy. So, everything was a production music track, except for the very last track, which was Crazy by Gnarls Barkley. And those tracks were all tracks from many of the panelists here, and I asked for tracks to send me tracks that we can listen to that were really good performing tracks for them, tracks that have been used a lot of times. And so this is going to lead us into, I want to look at or ask the panelists, and I think I'm starting with Dan. I want to ask Dan, are there any...
Award-winning, Dan, Mark Award-winning.
Thank you. Congratulations on the Mark Award, Dan. Gothic Storm. When we talk about production music, is there any rules or guidelines or that make something definitely a production music track? Things that production music tracks have to have?
I think it's true that really anything can be a production music track, because in television advertising they use classical music, they use commercial music, so really anything could be used if it's perfect for that particular end use. But in terms of things that make something a bit more usable, it can be things like having a clear end use in mind. So it's trying to express something that might be popular in television or drama. So that could be, tension or positivity or bright colors, or, trying to think visually, I suppose. It's visual music. Because demos that we get that are not very production music friendly might be a bit more just sort of mysterious or kind of artistic in a way that where people are thinking more about expressing their own dark feelings about something, So, it's thinking about the end use, I'd say. Also, maybe a bit minimal things can do well. Not having a main theme, that sort of musical motif, can be good, although we were talking to our Japanese sub-publishers who said you need to have more melodies in everything, so you never know. But yeah, that's some ideas.
Thank you. Edwina, you do searches all the time for clients across all with APM genres of music. I think APM probably has all genres from everywhere around the world. So adding to what Dan said, do you have anything that you think are production music, essential things that a production music track needs to have?
Well, I think the thing that's really unique about production music is that it's sort of this nexus between, a composer expressing themselves creatively, but also having to work within the confines of recognizing that the music is there to do a job. I always try to explain library music as working music. It's not there to be, the star of the show. It's really there to be the very important supporting player. So to the extent that when you're writing something, I think it's always important to think of potentially what kind of project is this going to be used. In other words, you have to think of library music not for things that are being used as source music, obviously a song, but for music that's going to be used as underscore. What application, what type of project do I envision this music being used for? When we get new music in and I start reviewing, the new albums for the month, the first thing that comes into my mind, again, because I'm working with clients, is what kind of project do I envision putting this into? And I think as a composer, as you're writing, yes, you need to be creative and you need to express yourself, but because on the business side, obviously, you want your music placed, be really cognizant of what kind of production you think your piece is going to be appropriate for, and understand what the needs of that type of production are.
And to drill down a little bit more on that, what would you say to composers out there that, what would they need to do to really understand, there's a difference between what someone thinks a piece of music might be effective for versus really what your clients are expecting?
I think the best thing you can do is see how music is being used. One of the things that I've found interesting is that you have to acknowledge that, yes, you might think something works really well. Obviously, the music that we get, composers are giving it to us because they think it's going to work really well. But if I try to throw it up against picture, or if I try to put it up against some kind of a narration, there's going to be this indefinable something that sometimes won't work. And a lot of times it's because, again, as a supporting player, it's good to show yourself off as a composer, but don't get too fancy some of the times, or give yourself alternate versions. Particularly with our clients, they want the option to be able to say, okay, this is great, this is a full version, but if it's scaled back, maybe it's going to be a little bit more useful. Stems, you absolutely have to have stems in this day and age. So giving our users the tools that they need to create the production that they want to create.
Thank you. Along those lines, Michelle, as an award-winning singer, songwriter, publisher, when it comes to lyrics for production music, songs created for production music, are there any rules that you use when working with your collaborators or your writers?
Sure. Well, excuse me, it's so early. Lyrically, we're talking not musically, right? Lyrically.
Lyrically.
Okay, so lyrically, it's best to have songs, in my opinion, the ones that I get placed the most are positive, empowering, inspiring, going for it. They're not about love or love relationships. Anything that's about sex, that has profanity is not good. So I have found, and I think across the board, everyone pretty much agrees, that to have a song that says, well, I have a song called Aim High, and the song has been placed 100 times. So that kind of a song about going for it, about colors, about friendship, about anything that's not romantic love is much better.
Thank you. And what about, Tim, what about structure or how production, are there any rules the way production music tracks start and end that's unique to production, or any have-tos that you have as a rule?
Yeah, I think I always try to think of the editor on the other side of the process, and for sure, like your endings are very important. Like everything's important, right? But your endings are super important. There's a lot of times people will work on a track, composers will work on a track and send it over, and it sounds fantastic, and then it just kind of trails off in the end, and it's like, no, it's got to have a really nice finish, because a lot of times editors are looking to give it that kind of punctuation at the end of a segment. And so if you have a great ending, that helps, I think, with getting the placement. So definitely some good endings, long reverb tails, at least in like the reality world, I find, you know, the shorter you're out, the quicker you're out, the better off you are, because they're just gonna kind of cut that out anyway. And then for beginnings, you know, like, there's kind of, not to kind of limit it, but I've always kind of had two approaches with it, which was either kind of jump right in, like just 0 to 60 right away, like with a track, or you can do kind of a building approach, you know, where late Cindy Bedell Slaughter was telling me one time that it's kind of like climbing a mountain sometimes approaches, right? Like you show up at the bottom, you start with a very interesting introduction to kind of bring someone into it, and then you're kind of making this journey, so you're building the track as you go, and your point of view becomes more expansive. That was kind of her analogy to it. So it's like building a track, you can have the kind of the building track method, or you could probably just jump right in, like I said, the 0 to 60 thing. So, but I think that tracks should always have some kind of interesting little bit of an open, as far as for me, right? Because that's going to attract someone's ear to it. And then, you know, the middle is just as important as the end, but everything is important. And definitely some, yeah, I mean, it's all important, yeah. And you know, the ending though, for sure, I think that's one area I do see a lot of composers just kind of letting it trail off in the end, but just really composing that ending to give it a big finish, I think is usually helpful. And it doesn't have to be, when I say big finish, it doesn't mean it has to be big and bombastic. You can do that with a very, you know, quieter tune kind of thing where it's just something that's impactful, you know.
Thank you. I was at the music supervisor panel yesterday, and the music supervisors were talking about the importance of being able to clear stuff quickly and easily, especially if they're working not directly with an artist. And it made me think about co-writes, and if you're writing with another composer. And so I want to ask you, Angela, like, what do you do with with when you're writing? What kind of deal or agreement do you have in place when you're doing a co-write with another writer?
You know, it's changed over the years. I started out doing anything and everything I could, and I think these days I'm very selective with that collaborator, and I only pick somebody that I'm comfortable splitting 50-50, because I know we're going to do 50% of the work each, or we're going to each do 100% of the work, is really kind of how we approach it. So I think for the most part, that's the only deal I'm looking for, and that's what the split sheet, master, publishing, and songwriting, all 50%. And we're usually both producers and songwriters. We may have different skill sets, like I'm the lyricist or the singer, and they're the guitarist, 'cause I don't play guitar, but we're looking for equal partners.
Right, so you're both 50% writer, 50% publisher, 50% master rights owner, which means then anything either of you want to do with that track as far as distribution has to be agreed on by both of you.
Yeah, so you have to be working with a professional that you trust. You trust their pitching techniques. You trust that they're going to keep your reputation intact, even in their networking techniques. So that's all important.
Awesome, thank you.
Can I add something?
Please.
So I wanted to just add, because I do the same thing, but I also make sure I have one-stop agreements. So if I'm going to write with Angela, we're going to make sure that we each sign a piece of paper that says we can pitch the song on behalf of each other, that we don't have to get further clearance. So, right, if Marek comes to me, I can tell her this song is a one-stop, that we don't have to go to Angela, she's already signed off on that. So that's another thing that's really important. And I make sure that my co-writers sign the agreements before we write. So if they come and they want to write with me, they have to sign the split sheet first to do equal splits, no matter if somebody wrote 10 words or 100 words or most of the music and the other didn't, excuse me, and they have to sign that one-stop agreement as well before we write one note, or else I'm not going to write with them. And as for the master, I'm usually the producer, and I usually own the master, and I usually discuss that with the collaborators up front, and if they don't agree, I either don't write with them or we negotiate some other way that maybe will work, but generally I don't do the master 50-50 because I usually do the whole production. So it depends.
That's important. That's important.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. That's very important. It's just good business practice up front. I think that's fantastic.
And I just want to add really quickly that a lot of musicians are kind of, I think scared is the wrong word, but kind of not really interested in doing the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But I'm telling you, just do it up front, because it's liberating. Because once you get that done, everyone's in agreement, everyone knows where everyone stands, and then you're free to be creative, right? Like you don't have that nebulous thought of where's this going to go, as long as you take care of it in advance. Yeah.
The paperwork is meant to save your relationship.
Yeah. Stay friends.
Yes, it's
Yes.
safe friend paperwork.
Okay, great. So you've got this track. We've completed this track, and then what? Then there's this term called metadata, which has been thrown around a lot, and I want to get really, really clear about it. I want to invite Ryan to talk about it, and just ask Ryan to define metadata, because I've heard people in Orpheum, when it comes to UGCs, that type of metadata, then search engines need other types of metadata. Can you just define that for us pretty quickly?
Yeah, so metadata can be used in a few different ways, and it kind of, there's, I guess I look at it one way, there's sort of collections metadata, royalty tracking, et cetera. That's more on being able to, that royalties and all that kind of stuff can track back to the composers, publishers, and all that kind of thing. So that metadata is extremely important. That's like CAE, IPI numbers, things like that, the PRO affiliation, so on. That all has to be accompanying all the tracks, of course. So there's that side of it. Then there's the, like searchability, creative metadata in some ways. I often call it that, where you have track descriptions, album descriptions, of course, moods and keywords and genres and anything, that music supervisors may want to locate music through. And there, and there's all kinds of new tools, of course, now, all kinds of things. But that's kind of another angle of it, is for the searchability and for the tracks to be found. So.
And the reason I want to really put a focus on metadata is because it's extremely important. And do we have, Ryan made a PDF, I think it's available on the app. It's something, I forget exactly where it is, but he did a general PDF. I don't know if we have it, if we can throw it up. If not, it's in the app, just about general practices and best practices. But, you know, you can write the greatest track in the world, but if Edwina, you know, and if it's distributed by APM, and if Edwina can't find it, she can't pitch it. I also want to talk about, it's important, what do composers need to know? Well, I should ask for APM, what do you expect composers, do they do their own metadata for APM, or does APM handle all of that for them?
Yeah, at APM, because we actually represent, we don't deal directly with composers, we represent a number of different libraries, and so it's the library's responsibility to supply APM with the metadata. And some libraries do their tagging on their own, some have their composers supply that. It really is dependent upon the library that we represent in terms of who's actually responsible for generating that metadata.
Right, and so Ryan oftentimes will generate that metadata, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, our company is you know, third-party vendor for a lot of production music libraries. So oftentimes that's a good fit. But even then, sometimes composers do provide initial information. You know, one thing that is always useful, and maybe is a good habit to start, if you end up making a deal with the production music library, is to document instrumentation. You know, sometimes we get that from composers, but not often. And while we're quite good at picking out, certainly if there's stems, that helps, but labeling the stems properly. But even then, sometimes you have stems that are a little more a general name and there's multiple instruments in there. But certainly if there's like special, unique instruments, things like that, that would be a good thing to kind of document just to make sure that's accurate. You know, we can pick those out, but sometimes, you know, instruments can be used and performed in ways that are not typical, and if we don't know what it is, we do our best. But
how can composers, because I think it's important for all composers to at least understand moods and genres, and there really is no standardization. I mean, certain things have been standardized, but what can you say to composers about how to educate themselves, about how to learn about what industry standard genres are and other metadata terms that they need?
yeah, I mean, as far as a lot of that, there's not much standardization. There's a few reasons. I mean, first of all, with genres and subgenres in particular, music's constantly evolving, and there's new subgenres. I mean, I remember years ago, of course, a lot of dubstep coming through. That isn't seen as often. Now it's more like trap, you know, and things like that, which things were not tagged with that very often years ago. So in some ways, it's hard to standardize some of that. But you know, as far as a hierarchy, having kind of top level, and there's kind of some standardization there. I mean, there's rock music, there's pop music, there's jazz, you know, things like that. So making sure there's some standard there, and that's in there at the top. But then how you come down from there, you know, I tend to think that it's stronger the more specific you can get, from kind of broader to more specific, but everything extremely relevant to the track. As far as moods, keywords, that kind of thing, libraries, all the libraries we work with, we see a whole range of things. They like to define their own taxonomies based on their clients' preferences. So that usually is a big factor. So every library is pretty different depending on what clients they have. You know, but yeah, having some standardization within each library is important, just so things can get consistently tagged. So that maybe a limited set of moods, a limited set, you know, of even instrumentation or some of that, just so everything kind of will fall into the same place. So it's not, you know, using a lot of different adjectives or different spellings or alternate kind of ways that some of that data is. But yeah.
I need to jump in on
Please.
this issue of
And
metadata.
we're going to take questions, so I don't know if somebody has a microphone that can like start fielding questions, but start thinking about questions, because we're moving into that section. Edwina.
Yeah, metadata is a huge pain point, I think, for many libraries and many composers. On my side, because we are working with so many different libraries and we're relying on them to supply us the metadata, the biggest challenge, and Ryan alluded to this, is consistency. And while there isn't a standard necessarily for particular moods or, and genres they are fluid, obviously. But one of the things that drives us nuts with me and the music team at APM are libraries and composers who are overly ambitious when it comes to their tagging. Where they'll say, well, yeah, this death metal piece could be used in a Christmas scene, So just because you think it can doesn't maybe mean you should. Really be realistic about it, because you have to remember that when a client goes onto a search engine and they start typing in their keywords or their tags or whatever it is that they want to find, your goal is to make sure that you meet their expectation, not your expectation of what you think it might be. But if somebody types in, Christmas, joyful, sparkling, you're going to expect that maybe you're going to hear glockenspiels. It's going to be fairly upbeat. It's not going to be sad. You really need to think, if you're the person responsible for tagging, or if you're doing your own tagging, really think about what the end user is going to want to expect. Because I'll tell you, the downside of if you get what I call overly ambitious, or if you over tag, what happens is people don't trust your metadata anymore. And then they shy away from using your library because they think, they've got some good music, but because I get these really random results every time I, type in something and their library name comes up, I'm not confident, and I don't have time. That's the thing. The metadata is there to save everybody time and to make their work more efficient. So anything you can do to help that is fabulous.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. I mean, yeah, like was mentioned, you don't need to anticipate the outside the box usages. I mean, let the music supervisor be creative in that sense. If they want to use some death metal in a Christmas song, they're going to search death metal. Yeah. And then they'll use it in a Christmas show or something like that. That you don't need to anticipate that kind of stuff. Let them do their creative thing. But yeah, I mean, we tend to kind of be as minimal as possible with the data. And one way we think about it is with moods, keywords, genres, any of that is we think of, if that singular tag that we're putting in there is searched and that track is at the top, it better be like, yep, that makes sense. Yep, it shouldn't be like, well, yeah, I guess I see that, but it's a little bit of a stretch. It needs to be like, it's that track. And if it's not, it should not be tagged with that, and then the whole accumulation of all the words then really, kind of define the track that way. And then that way, you're not going to get those kind of crazy search results where it just doesn't make any sense. So.
Heed those words. Very, very good. We can take some questions. I will ask the audience, if you ask a question, please have it be a universal question that could apply to everyone, not a case-specific question. You can save those if you can find one of us later on a specific question, but try and keep it universal so it could be relevant to all. So who has the mic right now? Yes.
Hey there. I have run into some points of tension with songwriting teams that I've worked with regarding split sheets. Since we're writing multiple catalogs, some of them insist on just having one split sheet and then adding titles onto a second page. The other teams are wanting each split sheet for each individual song, as much of a hassle as that is. What do you guys recommend?
I think you should have each individual song on their own split sheet, because you never know when you need to present something. It needs to be efficient. You don't want to give someone, if they're asking about one song, 85 songs. It's also not good for you. So I suggest you have one per song.
Question. How important, you mentioned metadata. How important are fields like sounds like artist, sounds like song? I do mostly instrumental music, a lot of tension, drama, sound design, etc. I can't put Atticus Ross and Hans Zimmer for everything that sounds like that, but there's not a lot of references. Are those fields important, or are you more focused on mood, tempo, key, things like that?
I try and stay away from sound-alike tags and things like that. If anyone remembers the Eminem-esque story, no, everyone heard about that? Or Eminem, basically, they were trying to license a track. It's someone in Australia, and he denied it. And so they went to a library track called Eminem-esque, And they used that, and he followed up on it and sued that production music library as well as the composer, as well as the licensor. And so I think while that stuff can probably be useful, I don't think you want to really give a breadcrumb trail of this is where I took this from, or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, but with
Yeah, I don't understand it.
and with songs, if it's a song, you really should have a sound alike because people look for that sounding like Taylor Swift, sounding like Beyonce. So I usually do and have to, and am required to do that, like you're saying.
I agree, and I would say too, keep that very limited for songs. I'm speaking. Keep it limited, and I always do maybe 2 big artists, household name artists, and 2 artists almost nobody has heard of, like under 100,000 followers. So because music supervisors will know those artists. So.
Yeah, we actually have a policy at APM that we will not allow a specific artist or song to be referenced in the track description because the exposure and the potential liability of that is just something we're not willing to take on. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't recognize that there are certain pieces, obviously, that we refer to it as inspired by. But yeah, it's a really tricky thing for all libraries and for all composers. But, don't get clever with your titles for the same reason. Exactly the example that was just cited. If you're writing something that is supposed to be Henry Mancini-ish, and you write something called the Pink Cat, that's a little too obvious, guys. So anyway, enough said.
Okay. We have one more. Who's got the mic over there? Yeah.
Okay. On introductions, starting on the downbeat, or is a 1 or 2 beat pickup note, is that good or bad for editors?
I think if you have like a drum fill or something like that, it's got to be super quick, like doom bang in, or you can just do it kind of cold right in. I think when you're doing that approach, I don't think you want to have anything that's too kind of. Yeah, you want something that kind of jumps in if you're doing that kind of track. What do you guys think?
I want to say something from the standpoint of how I know our clients use things. You have to know what kind of, it refers back to what I said earlier, what kind of production are you intending your piece to be used for? So for instance, all of our cocktail jazz, if you're doing cocktail jazz where it's intended to be a source cue, it should just sound like what would real cocktail jazz sound like. But again, understanding what the application is going to be for the music that you're writing. If I'm working with an ad agency, they don't want long introductions. They've only got 30 seconds to tell their message, so you better get to the point right away. But if you're doing something where you're working on a documentary and you jam in right away with that big percussion thing because you're doing the, cheetah chasing the gazelle, you've blown your story. You've given it away right at the beginning. So you really have to be cognizant of what is the type of project that you intend your music to be used in.
Yeah, I suppose the important thing is just that it just sounds good and it's well crafted and it just sounds like a good entry, and as she said, different introductions will work on different things. One thing we've started doing for the last year is always having an alternative intro and alternative ending version of every track. So I know that's a lot of extra work for the composers, but this was inspired by editors telling me that they would like that. They'd like to have the alternative. So, that way they get both.
And if it's library music, it depends on the library, and you really want to ask them if you're working for them, because I worked for one library, it was a German library, and they wanted everything on the tonic on the downbeat, to start and to end Achtung. They were very, and I did not do that because I had hard endings, I had short intros or no intros, but I wasn't starting on that tonic on the downbeat, and I had to fix 80 mixes. It took me 11 hours. So, if the library had communicated that to me, I would have known, but they didn't, and now I know to ask. So now I suggest ask who you're working for what they want.
I wanted to add one small asterisk to Edwina's comment. Look, acknowledging the fact that you deal with a lot more libraries than I do, I will say that sometimes the usages of things I've written have turned out to be far and afield from what I imagined. I mean, just to give a couple of examples that are
Use the
with
one from today, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's true. But they're just to give a couple examples that are with APM. One of the first pieces I wrote for my wife's library, the Empath Library, was a very twee flute Baroque piece that was, you know, you imagine people drinking tea with their fingertip up, and the Wrestling Channel uses it all the time. I have no idea why. And another one, my brother and I did this track of, you know, he had just bought some Native American flutes, and we did these sort of new agey floaty things that we thought, I mean, I'm not even sure what we thought we were going to use, it was going to be used for, but certainly not Downy fabric softener, which has made it a logo for them. So sometimes, you know, you do your best to target things, but you can't always know where the needle's going to land.
That's true. And this one, and people were saying, no, this isn't production music, but it is. And what was that used for, Michael? Michael wrote that one.
That wasn't that part of the Billie Eilish?
Yes.
Yeah. It was for a Gucci commercial, and so there you go.
All right. Well, thank you all. We need to move on to part 2. So you've written the track, you've got awesome track, you've got impeccable metadata. Now it's finding work. Where are you going to place it? There's so many libraries out there now. How do you know which ones to work with, which ones are reputable, what you should look for? I think I'd like to open that up to all. So anybody who wants to jump in to answer that, because, you know, this is what this event is all about. So anybody have any thoughts on that?
One thing I'd say is, well, if the library, you know, is a member of the PMA, that's going to be a good start, because, you know, they tend to overall perhaps have higher standards. I'm sure there's great non-PMA members out there, but that's a good start. Also, if you go to the websites and try and find out about the international sub-publishing, and then you go to the international sub-publishers' websites and you look at them, and then see who they're representing, you can start to build up a picture of which ones look a little bit down market with low quality music and low quality design and not many tracks and not very up to date, and then others that just seem very well designed and represent really excellent music that you like. So you can build up a picture just by doing research about looking websites, sub-publisher websites, you know, and just, I think that's a good way to establish whether someone seems to be good or not good.
And so that all that can be done online, just through online research.
Yep.
And can you, most, I would say probably, if not all, PMA libraries, most are exclusive. And I just want to be really clear that everyone, especially composers, you hear the word exclusive versus non-exclusive, and I just want to be really clear, too, that you understand when a library issues a non-exclusive license to the client, that is different from whether the library is an exclusive library or non-exclusive library. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that terminology and how those terms are used. But Dan, can you just talk a little bit about the difference between the exclusive versus non-exclusive? Your catalog is an exclusive catalog.
Yeah, exclusive. I mean, the word exclusive is used in different ways for different things. So when it comes to production music, it means that that track is only represented by that library and nobody else. It's not the same as in commercial music and commercial music publishing, where you might be exclusively signed to only one publishing company. So in production music, you'll have an exclusive track by track or album by album deal, but not an exclusive artist deal usually. But when you actually license the track to somebody, that becomes a non-exclusive license, so they can use it, but you can also license it to multiple other companies. Although you do get certain, sometimes they will ask for an exclusivity clause, which can be really complicated, but that can happen. But anyway, hope that helps.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about deals and customary deals, if that exists, if there is a customary deal in this business between composers and production music library. Dan, can you shed a little light on, I think you operate in more of a traditional way where composers work, and for you as a work for hire basis?
The way we do it is quite traditional, at least for the UK. I don't know if it's the same in the US, but so we have, the deals are that the composer shares 50% of the sync income, sync and mechanical income, and they get all their full share of the performance royalties. And we also give advances on future royalties. And so these 50-50 splits are quite common in the UK. There are variations, so some might only offer 25%, some will offer 0 but pay an upfront buyout fee, and then all your future money will have to come from performance royalties from when things are broadcast. So it can vary, but certainly our standard deal is 50-50 split of sync, and then, yeah, in perpetuity.
I just want to say, I think that there are a lot of different formulas that people have for composers in terms of upfront money, no upfront money, how much of the back end, and so forth. The one red flag that I would say that is not standard is when someone asks you for money upfront. That's a scam. Run.
What about if they ask for a percentage of your composer share, Michael?
Generally speaking, I think that's a bad idea. I do think, I know there's one company that is pretty well established that does that, but they also provide their generally young composers with a space to work in and so forth. And so, depending, if you're 23 and you're just out of school, that might be a good deal. I've never done that.
And it's interesting because, you've worked, with Hans Zimmer and other composers, as well as scored, Cold Case and many other projects on your own. But it's a little different within the film world, right? Because it's a lot more common to have revenue, writer share when you're maybe working for another composer.
Well, it depends. It really boils down to where is the money going to come from? And in the case of the production music world, the libraries have the publisher side of the PRO money. But in many cases in the film world, if you're working for Hans, say, he doesn't generally get a piece of the publishing unless he's negotiated something, unless it's an unusual deal. The studio will have that. So what's left of the pie is the writer's share. And so, I have to say, in the X number of films I worked on for Hans, I never felt I was badly treated, even though, yes, he did indeed get a percentage of what my writer's share was. And I thought it was fair because of the opportunity, and plus it was his concept overall. That's a whole, rabbit hole in itself that doesn't directly have to do with production music. But that formula is different for real reasons. That's not just an arbitrary distinction.
Thank you. Is there any other production music models, business models that anybody wants to?
Yeah, I actually have done some production music where I've kept half the publishing. So, and I was able to administrate that half of the publishing as well. It wasn't just that I got half the publishing like where they administrated 100%, but we each administrated our 50%. So that's unusual, but it does happen and it can be done. I've also done some production music deals where they pay all the expenses, which is non-recoupable. And then we split the sync master fees, and I get all the writer share and they get all the publisher share, but that's a different model as well because they paid all the expenses and it wasn't recoupable. So that was another model. And I've also done the model where they pay me a fee up front and they pay the expenses, and then I receive no share of the sync master. And I actually prefer that. So everybody prefers different things. I prefer it because then I don't feel like I'm policing them, looking for it. I just did it and they have it, and I get my writer's share of the performance money, and it's all easy and simple. But most people, I would say, prefer having a 50-50 share of the sync master fees.
Can I ask, Michelle, when you have those deals where they're paying your expenses, when you are the vocalist, when you are the producer, are you paying yourself as those parts of the production?
You know what? That's a great question, and I have not done that. No, I mean I could. That would be a little shady, but no, I tend to be kind of prissy and kind of don't do that. But that actually to me would be fair, really, because then I'm singing for free. So thank you for bringing that up. I have to work on that.
Yeah. It's very important because back in the day, there was the composer, and there was the arranger, and then there was the orchestrator, and the conductor, and the engineer, and the orchestra, and the players, and oftentimes now you're doing all of that.
Right. If I hire singers, of course, that I put in for an expense, but yeah.
I would like to open up to questions. I also want to say, too, and Ryan, if you want to add anything, you can.
Yeah, I might be anticipating a question here, and I kind of want to also have a question for people here because, we talk a little bit about metadata, but I think that a lot of times I get asked from composers that don't have a deal, do I need metadata? And I think, for pitching and stuff like that, and I kind of wanted to bring that up because usually my answer is, it depends, and I'm actually in some ways not sure. Usually what I tell them, I say, if you're going to get a deal with a library, do they provide the metadata? Because then you don't. You may have to provide them some basic information. I brought up about instruments before. I always recommend that, like I said. But, that's going to vary. I mean, I guess on pitching to libraries, I'd have a question. What would you say composers should do as far as metadata?
Every library I've worked for has been different. Some make me fill out spreadsheets that take like a gazillion hours. Some don't want me to give them the metadata. They want to tag it themselves. Oh, thank God. All right? So that's a great question because every one of them is different. But me, I have my own library, my own catalog that I pitch has about 1,200 songs. I, of course, have to input that metadata because I'm pitching the songs directly to the music supervisors.
Yeah. Right, yeah, I guess that's one thing. If you are going to start your own library, well then, yeah, that's going to be on you. If you're going to get a deal and you're trying to just find a deal because you don't want to start your own library, maybe see what deal you're going to do and see if they do it or not, but maybe don't come to me and pay me money to do metadata because you might not need that yet, that kind of thing. So
I just wanted to add, too, I've heard that from music supervisors as well. I managed the Guild of Music Supervisors for 4 years and just heard behind the lines regularly, and everybody had a different opinion about how much metadata they wanted, what type of metadata, whether they wanted pink to show up in their email or whether that was a real pain for them. So it's very specific to who you're working with.
I'd like to open it up to answering questions. So I don't know who has the mic, but let's bring some questions because there's a lot here.
We have a question from the live stream.
Great.
From Vinay Kashal. He says, greetings from India. Although many libraries and publishers do rename songs, how important is it for a composer to name their pieces of music, and do you have any tips for that? Because very often at the end of the day, it's just song in E.
I'd like to have Edwina answer that since you do searches all the time.
Yeah. song 1, song 2, song 3, song 4. That's not really very helpful for us. I mean, one of the things you have to realize is whatever information that you're providing for, and this goes to both composers, to libraries, you're trying to make an impression on the person who has discovered your music. And they've discovered your music maybe because they typed in a keyword or typed in a tag and you had pristine metadata, and so your track came up. So now you're in there amongst, any number of other cues that have come up in that search engine who are vying for, that user's attention, saying, use me, or at least listen to me. So I think having a track title that gives the piece character or helps point to something that embodies, the spirit of what that music is supposed to express, that can only help you. And it helps to distinguish your piece from all the other pieces on your same album. And it helps to distinguish your piece from, the other tracks that you're basically competing with when, somebody goes into, you get this whole list. If I see an exciting title or something that sounds intriguing, I'm much more likely to say, that's really interesting. Let me at least check that one out, because I only have time to listen to 5, and I've got a list of 20. You're going to go to the ones that...
I wanted to add, to second that and say, my brother who lives in Nashville did a track that was like, how the heck am I going to sell this? It was a mixture of sort of bluegrass and Middle Eastern music, which, okay, how are you going to do this? So he called it Baghdad Banjo Bob. And it's the best-selling track he's ever had.
Yeah. Because it's catchy. You go, wow, that is such a bizarre title.
Yeah.
I have got to check that out.
It's a space to be
come across
creative, right? Be creative in that title space. It's another opportunity to be a creator there. Absolutely. I think clickability, that's kind of the number one thing in my head if I'm titling a song.
Yeah, I have a friend who has a song called Pom Poms and Ass, and that song gets placed constantly. Constantly. It's an instrumental cue.
I think it's, sorry, we also, one thing I've noticed is that when we get demos, if you just listen to the music, you can think, I'm not really sure, I don't see where this could be used, and I don't really know what you're getting at. But then if it's got a title that really places it in a very specific kind of context, then it can suddenly sound 10 times better. You suddenly go, now I see. So a good title, even on a demo or in a work in progress, it kind of gives you a mental picture that prepares you to imagine the right things while you're listening to it. And without that, if it's just a number, you can be thinking, you can start focusing on just abstract details, just like the key or the tempo, and you're not really thinking about the end use.
Yeah, it really does help plant the seed. We talked about knowing what it is that you envision your music being used for. This is another way to reinforce that message.
Yeah, I mean, what the first thing an editor sees, right? The music's the most important thing, right? But the first thing they see is the waveform and the title. Yeah. Right, so the titles are super important. I've seen that with a lot of composers. They work really hard on the music and the track. They get it mixed great, it sounds wonderful, and then the title's just kind of like you mentioned earlier, like song 1, song 2, song 3, and it's like, like Jimi Hendrix used to say, give people something to dream on, right? Just kind of bring in that title to really kind of sell it and bring it home so it does get clicked on.
I do think of the editor in his dark room, not seeing the light of day, like what's going to make him chuckle or what's going to make him go, brighten his day, her day.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Andrew. Hi. You guys brought up some red flags, and something came to mind that I want to kind of put out there and also ask your opinions of, because I've noticed at least 2 different entities lately were offering exclusive advance access to their music briefs for a low monthly rate. Boo.
So would this be like it's kind of like a pay-to-play model, right?
Exactly. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure the same person would be taking a cut of that brief budget. Sort of a double dip.
Anybody want to take that?
I do want to say, you know how they have the gold advertisements to buy gold now or sell gold now? And somebody once told me just to do the opposite, not that I'm buying or selling gold. But I noticed during the pandemic, when nobody was making anything, a lot of that stuff started cropping up because somebody needed money, right? And maybe there wasn't even a place for that to go. So I would be very cautious about that. Not every time, but pretty across the board. That's a no for me.
I think an important distinction might be between a company that are setting themselves up as like a library and they're saying we're going to take ownership of this and you have to pay us. That's absolute red flag. But something that can look like that but which isn't that is like I don't know if you I'm sure there's other companies, but like a taxi and other things where it's more like a kind of a funneling service that collects demos, a screening. Yeah, and it will forward things. So yeah, so they're not claiming ownership. So, you know, people get different results from that kind of service, and some get good results, some bad. But it's a different thing, and that's not really a red flag. That's something just to consider.
There are opportunities to pitch your music, and you pay, you know, $100 to meet a music supervisor. I've done it. I don't know that it gets the best results, but there are pay-to-play options out there. Beware.
I think overall you just have to really assess what each deal is, because even though there's usual and customary deals, there's always things that pop up. I've done stuff in the past where I've actually shared writers' share on my end, but it's because I kind of assessed it and thought this is a bigger opportunity in the long run than not. And the same can be said for anything like non-exclusive, exclusive versus royalty-free, but I don't do royalty-free because it says royalty-free, you know. But I think you need to really, yeah, right. You just kind of need to assess each situation for what it is too, and that's because not every deal is going to be the same. Not every library has the same deal with different production companies or different networks or what have you, right? So it's kind of riding that wave and assessing like, is this going to work out? How's this going to look in the long run? How's this going to look 2-3 years from now? Right.
Could I just share really quickly about assessing, because there are so many new composers here. I think it's so important, as we were talking about seeking libraries, exactly what Tim was just saying, do your homework. I look for their most recent placements. Are they going to be a $250 placement? Are they going to be a $2,000 placement? Are they in ads and video games, or are they just doing you know, some specific work? I go on LinkedIn and I see who they know. If they don't know, you know, different people than me or have a different pocket, why am I giving them half of my, you know, earnings? So I think it's really important to be assessing these. Not everything that smells like a bad deal is, and you can talk to people. People in here have hundreds and thousands of placements, and they can give you the inside scoop. Maybe not from the stage. They're not going to drop names, but they can share it around the bar, maybe, and give you some pointers. So.
Yeah, and I agree. And I'm going to jump in, Tim, about royalty-free, because I actually do a form of royalty-free, which is micro-licensing. And I will work with a royalty-free company. Usually they put out an album of my songs. And then I do kind of get royalties, because though it's not called a royalty, it's called royalty-free because the user is not paying a royalty. It's micro-licensing, like a grandmother using music for her grandson's bar mitzvah. And she is paying a fee to use that music, a one-time fee. And then I am getting a percentage of that money. So in a way, I am getting a royalty, but that kind of a micro-licensing library is also called royalty-free. So I think the royalty-free that Tim is discussing is where you give the music away completely. They pay you a tiny bit up front, like, I'm going to say the word, our friend Extreme, oh my God, not Extreme. Extreme is amazing. See, there we go. It's called, what's it called? Epidemic, thank you. Oh my God, Epidemic Sound, yes, thank you. Epidemic Sound, where they pay you this little snippet up front, and then they own the songs forever, and they get the royalties, and you get nothing. That is not a good model of royalty-free, but royalty-free that's micro-licensing is actually really cool. And so I wouldn't, if you're new and didn't know the difference, I just wanted to mention that so that you don't ignore those opportunities, because you don't give any of the copyright away with that kind of royalty-free.
I wanted to add one thing in terms of the library owners. The problem with the terminology royalty free is that it implies that, say, if you're a library owner, you've got to pay ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and that's not the case. Those licenses are with broadcasters, so forth. They are not something, just because something is called royalty free doesn't mean that you have to, as a client, this is something you need to communicate to your clients, that they don't have to pay an additional PRO money as opposed to royalty free. It's the same deal. The only difference is that you're not paying a sync fee.
Yeah, well, they bypass the PROs, exactly. They bypass the whole PRO system, but they are paying the composer.
So
It's
I'm
really a
wanting
marketing
to,
term.
we could go on this forever. But I also want to encourage all of you, I mean, one of the reasons why I joined the PMA was because of all the information that people were willing to share with me, and I encourage you to do that with each other. So when it comes to researching any of these things, ask each other, hey, what are you doing for this? You know, this is what I love about the PMA is giving information so that we can all, you know, rise together and keep the value of music as high as possible in these times. So let's just keep the conversation going. But now let's go on to the fun part. So we've created the track, you found the library, and now, or you've made a deal. And we're going to dive into that maybe a little bit, but we're going to talk about revenue streams right now. We're not going to define all the revenue streams. If you hear something like neighboring rights or broadcast mechanicals, you have no idea what it is, write it down, do your research. We're not going to do a deep dive on that because we don't have time for it. I think what would be valuable for composers is to know really possibly the greatest revenue streams to maybe the least revenue streams that might not be so great. And we may have differences of opinion, and so that's going to be important, valuable for everyone to hear. But I want to just start with like top line revenue. And can we agree that upfront fees to write something and performance royalties through your PRO would be the greatest two revenue streams from creating a piece of music? Can we agree on that? Upfront fee and performance royalties. Do we agree that those would be the greatest? If you had a pie chart of all the revenue streams that you generate for your music, can we agree that upfront fees and royalties
For production music.
for production?
Actually, not in my case. I wouldn't say upfront fees. Upfront sync.
Okay, thank you. So
I agree with
thank you
that.
for clarifying. And that includes sync. For sync, yeah, sync, licensing fees, and royalties, performance royalties.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And it does vary by different types of music, because like trailer music is much more sync, much less performance. And then internationally, in some countries, it's much more performance, much less sync. In some countries, it's more sync. So the amounts can vary.
Absolutely. So, so I think what I wanted to do when we talk about the revenue streams right now is really look at, you know, who collects them, and then does the composer participate in that? And there's going to be differing answers, but this is all going to then point back to your agreements, you know, and looking at your agreements, because those will spell out whether you will or will not participate in some of these other revenues. So we've identified sync, that's a negotiated revenue stream that may or may not be in your agreement. Performance royalties, if you're the writer, it's going to go straight to you from your PRO. Let's talk a little bit, I mean, UGC revenue has really been going up a lot more, and so UGC, so we're talking about YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and is it safe to say, Edwina, that, yeah, that the publisher, now when I use the word publisher, we're meaning the catalog, the library, which controls both publishing and master, but I might use the word publisher to mean the production music catalog. So it's safe to say the production music catalog collects those revenues.
Yeah, I mean, if we have revenue, I mean, there is a sync license for those types of UGC, you know, projects. So APM is collecting, you know, the licensing revenue for that, and we treat it as all of our other sync revenue. It's money that came in because somebody licensed the use of that music, and we do the splits with the libraries, and the libraries do their splits with the composer on the sync side, and then as a composer, you get your performance royalties directly still.
So
The ones that are, you know,
right, so you said you pay the library their share, which may include the composer's share. However, if that library has a deal with a composer where they do not need to include that in their payments, that's their business, right?
that's their business. APM's deals are with our libraries. They are not directly with the composers. So if you have a question about your royalty statement or whatever, you go to the library that you've signed your agreement with. Yeah, APM's responsibility is to make sure that the revenues we get are passed on to the libraries that we represent, and then, you know, because each library, we don't have any control over the agreement that that library might have with their composer. So at that point in time, it's the responsibility, or the agreement is between the composer and the library in terms of how that revenue might be shared on the sync side.
Very important point. And I know that YouTube will, you know, for advertising revenue on YouTube, it's you know what it is on a specific track, so you're able to track that. How does it work for Facebook and TikTok? Is it similar data or is it different data? Is it track specific?
I actually can't answer that question because I don't get involved in that side of things at my company.
Anybody else have?
About the PRO money, or are you talking?
No, we're talking about money directly received for Facebook and TikTok.
Yeah, well, TikTok comes through music reports. So the TikTok revenue comes through MRI. That would go to the publisher. And so if the music library is the publisher, it goes directly to the publisher. If someone else owns their own publishing, like I do, except for my production music, then it comes to me. But it's very small, and it is interesting because it's new. If the music libraries distribute, we would have to ask them, because it's probably not in our older contracts because it didn't really exist. It might be considered a media now known or someday known or something like that. But as for Facebook, I was just speaking with someone at CSEC about that the other day. Facebook doesn't quite pay yet. It kind of doesn't really pay specifically. It kind of pays randomly, which means there's no real set distribution yet for Facebook, but BMI is distributing a little bit, and CSAC says they will once it becomes a little more clear and transparent what exactly they're receiving. So that's what I know. And what about you? Let's say you got that revenue, how do you disperse that with your composers?
Well, if we did receive any revenue, it'd be split 50-50, but we do have a kind of a company that we work with who's our content ID partner, where they're mainly dealing with YouTube, and they do collect for everything else, but to the best of my knowledge, they haven't actually had anything, or certainly not much from these new sources, so I'm not sure. Sounds to me like it's something that we need to keep on top of.
But you would distribute it, because I think some libraries maybe wouldn't, right? Depending on the deal.
I mean, any revenue that we get in, we have to account for. You know, what was the source? In other words, who was the licensee of that music? All right, so we know, you know, who paid it in, whether it came from ASCAP or whether it came from sync licensing or whatever. But there is a track or tracks, or there's a body of work that's associated with that, and so APM is obligated to, based on the information we have, pay that money out. You know, who it came from is, from our standpoint, yes, we want to make sure that we're maximizing all of the potential revenue sources that, you know, are using our music. But if you're talking about how do we pay out, it's money that's in, and it is owed to the publishers and then gets paid out. From our purposes, in terms of the paying out, it really isn't as much oh, is it from UGC? Is it from a regular sync? It's that we got that money in and we are obligated, if we're going to be running an upfront business, to pay it out to our publishers.
But do you get paid the music reports money, or do the individual publishers get it?
Well, because we're acting, that's an Adam Taylor question, honestly, because I'm not involved in those agreements at that
But
level.
it's an interesting thought. I've never thought about it before, so it's so
I'm
great
sure-
you brought
I'm-
this up,
you know,
Andrew, because I never
know
thought
he
about
has
it.
the answer, but again, that's one of those things where I don't want to have to work with that
I
part.
would say that generally speaking, in terms of answering your question, though, Andrew, my two biggest sources of revenues are sync fees and PRO money. In fact, one of my personal heroes, Sean Lamone, is in the audience right now, who works for ASCAP. And yes, that is buttering you up, sir. But ASCAP has really been enormously helpful for me on this. I would say that there are a couple of other streams of income people don't talk about much. Thanks to Michael Lehman Boddicker, I learned about neighboring rights, which I was completely ignorant of about 5 years ago. Yet they're a significant thing, especially in Europe. And there are also there are some similar things here in the United States, although not as significant a stream. But for those who don't know what a neighboring right is, it's really about the performance of the performers on the track, which most of us composers are performing as well. And and it varies from country to country, and it's very complicated. But if you can get somebody to collect that, that is, I wouldn't say it's in the same class of the PRO money or anything, but it's a growing area. Yeah, it's worth. Hey, it's free money. You might as well collect it.
And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about neighboring rights, because that's where the artists themselves, the performers, collect directly. We're still on what the publishers, when you sign, what the publishers collect. So we've covered
jumping the gun.
It's okay. We're going to get there. And we'll get to questions very shortly, everyone. So UGC, and I think we can all agree, it's a growing revenue stream, and there is a data reporting problem. I know the PROs, BMI, and ASCAP are working really hard to try and get data, and oftentimes they're not able to quite get some of the Facebooks and the data from that they would like.
Andrew, what does UGC stand for?
User-generated content. Yeah. Thank you for asking. So that would be YouTube. Yeah.
YouTube is the significant one now.
Yes. Another revenue stream for everyone just to be aware of. This is just, top line stuff. Broadcast mechanicals. Look it up. But this is a royalty that is collected by the publisher, and it's paid out in about 13 or so territories, mostly in Europe. And it is from the performance of your music. It's similar but different to a performance royalty. But this is one where only the publisher collects, and they are able to collect the master side. So this was revenue also that APM would pay out to.
Well, because APM our territories are U.S. and Canada only. So when you're talking about broadcast mechanicals, it would be the publishers we represent would take care of that in their territories, but we don't do broadcast mechanicals here.
APM, you have your own wholly owned.
Well, because APM actually is acting as the agent, the licensing and marketing agents for the libraries we represent, the only territories where we're actually issuing licenses and where we're collecting license fees is for U.S. and Canada. Those are our only territories. We don't have worldwide. We're not responsible for worldwide synchronization. So for instance, a library that we might represent here in the US could be represented by a completely different entity abroad, and that would be their responsibility and their oversight.
Got it. So then, Dan, this is a revenue that you're very familiar with, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the MCPS in the UK, which is the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society. And although my understanding of it is it's really doing sync and mechanical licenses on behalf of publishers. It's like a central licensing agency that acts on the publisher's behalf. So they collect the money, and they've got a standard rate card that sort of holds the line and keeps the prices at a kind of a good level. and you know, some people say that it's anti-competitive, so it gets some kind of pushback. But there's a similar thing, I think, in Australia with AMCOS and possibly Japan. I don't know, but it's not many territories where they have that kind of centralized agency. But they're doing sync and mechanical licenses.
Right, and it's safe to say that the publisher collects both the publisher share and the composer share.
Yeah.
And depending on the composer's deal with the catalog, they may or may not participate in that revenue.
Yeah, it depends whether it's what the deal is. But if you've got a 50-50 deal on sort of sync, then that's, you know, you'd get 50% of that.
My understanding is this royalty varies basically from territory to territory. Like France, it can be quite good. Do you have any idea, like as far as, just to give everyone an idea of like, there's all these revenue streams. If all of you are chasing these small revenue streams or, you know, possibly insignificant revenue streams and not creating music, it might not be worth your time, right? So I'm just curious, like how significant to you are the broadcast mechanical revenue stream?
I can only say our head of royalties, Michael, who's there, will know the breakdown, but I just say, well, that's how much we're giving out, that's how much we're keeping, and I'm sure it varies from territory to territory. There's not just mechanical and sync, there's a whole set of different societies in different countries that collect for video, music on pop videos and all sorts of things, so yeah, I don't know the breakdown.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Want to also identify, and we're going to get to questions very shortly, streaming royalties, right? So oftentimes albums might get put out of production music libraries. There might be actual people still might be downloading, buying albums, I don't know, but at least they're streaming them. And so there's streaming revenue from all the DSPs out there that distribute music digitally.
Some libraries don't distribute the music. Also, that might be a consideration if you actually care about that you might sign with a library that does not release the music because the income is so insignificant to them, they choose not to bother.
Has anybody released albums as listening albums, you know, on Spotify?
Our Gothic Storm label, because it's trailer music, has got quite a following amongst just fans of trailers and trailer music. So that actually that actually does quite well sometimes. You know, our top tracks have got, you know, many millions of streams on Spotify. So it's you know, it's a significant revenue stream. Not as much as YouTube Content ID. I don't know if you're getting onto that, but that's for us. That's a very, very significant stream now.
But that's all coming in through PRO, right? That's not a different.
YouTube Content ID does not know that.
Other than, right.
That's coming from unlicensed uses of your music on YouTube. So and YouTube detect your track and they collect. They put adverts on and then you collect it. Now for us, we don't do it directly. We've got a company that we work with, EMVN, which is similar to AdRev, where they will take a small cut and give us the rest, and then we share 50% with the composers. But for us, that's like, off the top of my head, it's about maybe 10% of our entire global revenue, so it's really not far behind revenue actually from Hollywood trailers. So it's become much bigger than most separate countries for us. So it's become a really big thing.
Right, and that YouTube money or the other UGC doesn't come from your PRO. It comes from outside other companies like AdRev and Hawk and Orpheum and other places where they collect that money. So if you have some significant money out there that you own the publishing on or own the masters on, then you really need to have one of these companies collecting for you.
But the non-interactive digital streaming platforms, Spotify, Pandora, that type, that comes through your PRO.
Yes, but that's the streaming, not the the non-interactive part, yeah.
Well, let's be clear. It's my understanding, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but the PROs collect a much smaller percentage of the revenue from streaming than the labels do. The labels are getting around 45 cents on the dollar.
50%. Labels get 50%, featured artist gets 45, and any backing
sound
artist
exchange.
gets 5%.
But that sound exchange, that's different. That's not, yeah. That's not PRO money. That's sound exchange.
Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is labels collect around 45%, and the PROs get around 5% from Spotify streaming. Is that
from the stream part,
Sean?
not the
Sean,
mechanical.
correct, please correct
Sean,
me.
you're the expert here.
Yes, and they're two. Like a ratio like that is fixed. It's not that fixed like that. No. Yeah, thank you. But it's safe to say the PRO revenue from streaming is significantly less than what the labels collect.
It's less than, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you distribute your own music, your distributor pays you that label money. The master money actually comes from CD Baby and DistroKid and TuneCore and all those distributors that you're using to distribute your money in terms of self-releasing.
Okay, I want to get questions because we can go on this forever, and I know we can do deep dives on all of this. So,
Can I say too, Andrew, since there's so much here, I know Dan has a book, right? What's the name
yes.
of your book, Dan?
Thank you for mentioning that.
And a very nice visual.
Oh, it's called A Composer's Guide to Library Music, and it's just an ebook. You could search that, but that was released 5 years ago, so I really need to do an updated version that takes into account all the new developments.
Tracy and Vance Marino are in the audience. They're the tallest people here by far, I'm sure. They have a book that also covers some of this, so the information's out there.
Awesome, thank you. Questions?
First of all, I just want to say, as a library that is with APM, Facebook actually does report out. I do get them on my statements. Anything we receive, we give half to our composers. But for Facebook, I get pages and pages of zeros. So I just want to throw that out there. I guess my question and my concern is the UGCs and the DSPs. Is anyone aware of the market share that they're, because we're seeing more and more going in that direction. And I'm just wondering if you had some idea of the percentages. We're seeing some increases in payouts, but is that significant, and are they enough to actually merit tracking and influencing and is being a composer a viable profession?
Great question. Anybody want to take that?
I think it depends. It depends how long you've been doing it, how good you are, how good the companies are that you've got your music with. And when I say good, I just mean the quality of their distribution, how their standards, how good their clients are, how good their sales teams are. So certainly, if you're in the sort of top 10% worldwide, then on all fronts, then you've got a good chance of earning a good income. If you're in the top 5%, you're doing really well. So I think if you're one of the many people that's quite new to it, and you've just started, and you've got you're just doing it part-time amongst other things, then maybe it'll take a long time to really replace other forms of income. So it really depends.
It depends on.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say you have to diversify. We have to we can't be putting all our eggs in one basket, not in one music library. We have to use multiples. We have to have sync agents. We have to learn how to pitch directly. We have to market, maybe going on Twitch. I have a friend, she's on Twitch, and she does concerts and makes thousands of dollars a month and builds a fan base on Twitch alone. Maybe she also has a Patreon. So I would say that, you know what, Marette, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. We have to be out there diversifying in store. Retail is another way to get our music there. So we really have to be business people, right, as composers and especially songwriters, and get out there and diversify.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think it's a fantastic question, Marette. Thank you. It's a piece of a pie. for me. And I think a lot of people up here wear multiple hats. They're also music supervisors, they're also library owners, they're also composers. And that's, I mean, that's the reality. Last year was an excellent year for me. This year has not been so great with the strike and everything. So, I mean, that's just the truth on my side. So it's a fair question we need to be asking. How do we move towards sustainability, right? And, I mean, relationships is a huge part of that answer. That's all I can have to say.
Awesome. Another question.
Can some of you libraries talk about how you retitle tracks that are from like independent artists that have their own publishing?
So let's get.
Is there a system, that you guys use for retitling?
So you're talking about retitling for what purpose?
For with the PROs, retitling tracks for like ASCAP and BMI, so that you can get the publishing for
non-exclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not clear on what is it. Are you asking an
This might be
opinion
a
on this?
songwriter question more than a track question, right? Is that what you're asking, Chuck? Because I know
Yeah.
for the songwriter world, there are deals that I've signed where there is retitling. That means one library is representing it, but so they want everything that they kill, they get to eat. So they retitle the track, my track, Dancing, retitle 1, 2. And in another library, it might be Dancing, retitle Gothic Storm, just not that Dan does that. So that whatever they place, they get paid for. That might be more of a songwriter situation than an instrumental cue situation.
Yeah, it's a non-exclusive, right? Exactly like Angela said, it's a non-exclusive library thing. Like an exclusive library doesn't need to retitle tracks because they own they own the songs. Right, but non-exclusives do that. A lot of people don't believe in that. I am somebody who loves to do that and has songs with 40 libraries and 40 titles and different sync agents, like Angela was saying, how they retitle. Also, sometimes they use a code. Yeah. So, like, I have a friend who has a library called Pink Shark Music, and it says PSM before the real song title. So a lot of libraries are doing that, or they put a suffix that is inherent to them to identify the track. And it's not very popular here at the PMA, the concept of retitling at all, but I humbly do it all the time.
It's not as popular.
But not with production music. I mean, if I do something for Moret or for my dear friend JC over there exclusively, I am never going to retitle that song and go behind their backs and do anything that's incorrect, right? These are only songs that I own, that Angela owns, that we're doing that with.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that because that whole idea of retitling, just again, to be very clear, for a library like APM, we don't do retitling because everything that we represent exclusively for our territories. We don't want, when the whole retitling thing was kind of a mess about 10 years ago and people were trying to understandably, I suppose they were trying to maximize the exposure of their music, so they said, well, I'll place it with this library, call it Title A, and I'll place it in this other library and call it Title B, and, who knows, they might get, somebody might find it, I've given myself additional exposure. It created such ill will and such distrust, because what happens is the client finds the track from Library A and they go, oh, wow, I really like this song. But wait a minute, I found that same song from Library B. And if you had somebody who was a little shady, they'd try to play the quote from Library A against the quote from Library B. Yeah. And then you'd have a music supervisor who would say, I don't know who to trust, because ultimately their job and their reputation is on the line. They need to be able to go to their producer, their studio, whoever it is they're working for, say, I have secured a license for this, there are no other claims, it's clean, you're not going to have somebody coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, you didn't license that from me. So you can understand where if you've got the same song placed with different companies where it's not exclusive, you run the risk of putting the ultimate user in a very uncomfortable position, because if Library A doesn't know that Library B licensed that track, Library A would go to the, whoever the producer of the show is and say, I never licensed that. Well, no, you didn't license it from A, but you licensed it from B. So the whole issue of retitling, and again, with regard to library music. Whatever that track is, if you have placed it with a library, it is only with that library, and it has that one title that's identifiable. And it doesn't really make sense to give it multiple titles at that point in time because, you know, that piece of music, even if it's, for instance, APM only licenses for US and Canada, it doesn't really make sense for, you know, Edwina's track to be called Edwina's track in the US and Canada and to be called
Andrew's track.
Andrew's track outside of the US and Canada. You know, what's the purpose? You've got one track, you've got one title.
This is a big topic. We could keep on going, but I have to wrap it up. I will end with Edwina. I want to ask, are there clients, and can you name some, that require exclusive, that would not represent you with non-exclusive tracks, that require exclusivity?
I would say it's clients, but it's sort of an unspoken rule, certainly with all the music supervisors that we work with who are working on, you know, big film and television projects. Their expectation from us is that we are not dealing with retitled content.
Do the major networks care whether it's exclusive or non-exclusive?
You know, I've never actually asked that question because I'm not on the sales side. I don't know if it comes up.
I
I
think
think it
they do.
depends.
They don't
It
care.
depends is the answer.
I've never seen them care. I mean, I license to all different networks all the time. I've never seen them care. And also,
Retitled.
Yeah, retitles. Also, music supervisors who use non-exclusive libraries know they're non-exclusive and know there could be retitles. So I have never had a problem with anybody saying they were pitching the song and someone else was pitching the song and libraries fighting over it. First of all, no one wants to upset the music supervisor. So if two libraries were both pitching the same song and thought they each deserved the deal, they would work it out amongst themselves quickly, and they wouldn't involve the music supervisor. And secondly, again, it's the music supervisor's choice to go to the non-exclusive library. So if they're doing that, then it's not an issue.
Yeah, and in that case, the music supervisor knows they're going to a non-exclusive library. For APM, because we are an exclusive library, we have to make sure that anything that we represent falls under that category.
We could go on this for a long time, but I know we need to wrap it up. This has been fantastic. I'd like to ask everyone to give a big round of applause for our panelists. I'd also like to recommend that you check out Alan Lazar's panel coming up next with John Burlingame. If you know who John Burlingame is, then I'm sure you're going to stick around. If you don't, he is the most amazing writer and champion and lover of the history of television music and film music and has an encyclopedic knowledge, and Alan Lazar is going to be interviewing John Burlingame, and so you're in for a treat, so I recommend sticking around for the next one. And thank you all for coming.
Good job, Andrew. Good job keeping us on time. Amazing. Yeah. I saw the clock ticking in his eyes.